She walked into the police station like any other civilian. No badge, no uniform, no escort. Just a black woman in jeans, a blazer, and calm eyes that saw everything. No one knew that Camille Hart was the newly appointed chief of police. That's exactly how she wanted it. Ashland PD had a reputation, whispered stories of misconduct, silent walls, and a power structure that protected its own. For decades, officers of color had been overlooked, their voices drowned in a culture of quiet complicity. Camille had lived that story pushed aside, talked over, underestimated. But this time, she wasn't here to knock. She was here to walk through the front door and see the truth for herself. What she found confirmed everything. A black man left waiting, ignored. A receptionist glued to his phone. A veteran Lieutenant Dean Rourke who didn't just question her presence, he belittled it. His words dripped with contempt, his tone sharpened with authority he thought was untouchable, until he struck her, in front of his peers, in front of the very system he believed would protect him. And then the truth dropped: she was his superior, the chief. What happened next didn't just shatter the room, it shook an entire department. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about strategy, courage, and what happens when someone walks into a broken system not to survive it, but to expose and rebuild it. Welcome to Beneath the Badge. Camille didn't flinch. Not when the young officer behind the reception desk barely looked up from his phone. Not when the older white officer by the water cooler muttered, "Another one with a sob story," as his eyes landed on the elderly black man waiting quietly in the corner. Not even when Lieutenant Dean Rourke approached, his expression carved from the same stone as the building's foundation, rigid, cold, and full of unspoken judgment. She stood perfectly still, absorbing it all. This was what she had come for, not the ceremony, not the press photos, but this, the unfiltered truth. And truth here in Ashland PD was embedded not in rules or policies, but in the casual way injustice slipped between the cracks of ordinary moments. The man in the corner, later identified as Raymond Knox, had been sitting for at least 20 minutes, shifting uncomfortably, glancing around, clearly unsure whether to ask for help or keep waiting. No one had acknowledged him. No clipboard, no question, just silence. Camille stepped to the counter, cleared her throat gently. The receptionist, Officer Luke Weller, as his badge read, glanced up, gave her a once-over, then offered a thin, dismissive smirk. "Yeah? I'm here to speak with HR," she said calmly. He blinked, then shrugged. "You applying for something?" "No, I need to finalize some administrative paperwork." He didn't respond, just turned his attention back to his screen, letting her stand there waiting, invisible. Camille didn't move. She took in the layout of the lobby, where the security cameras were placed. Who was watching? Who wasn't? Her memory logged every face, every word, every glance. Then Rourke appeared. He didn't ask her name, didn't offer assistance. He stood squarely in front of her like a gatekeeper defending some sacred space from intrusion. "You sure you're in the right building?" he asked, voice flat, laced with something that wasn't quite sarcasm, it was deeper than that. Habitual, entitled. She looked him in the eye, tone still calm. "I am." And in that moment, surrounded by apathy and thinly veiled disdain, Camille realized something chilling. They weren't just ignoring her because they didn't know who she was. They were treating her exactly the way they'd treat any black woman who dared walk through those doors asking for respect, which meant her strategy was working, and the reckoning had just begun. Lieutenant Dean Rourke took a step closer, eyes narrowing. "You need to understand something," he said, folding his arms. "This isn't the kind of place where people walk in and start demanding things." Camille didn't flinch. "I haven't demanded anything," she said evenly. "I asked to speak to Human Resources. That's a standard administrative request." Rourke scoffed, loud enough for a few officers nearby to glance over. "You're wasting everyone's time. We don't have the capacity to deal with whatever this is." He motioned at her vaguely, dismissively, not just her presence, but her identity. Camille could feel the weight of the room shifting. No one was stepping in, no one was stopping him. That was the real test, not his arrogance, but their silence. She kept her voice steady. "Then call someone who can assist me." Rourke leaned in slightly, his breath thick with disdain. "You got a lot of nerve." Camille met his gaze head on. "I've heard that before." A beat, tension. Eyes from every corner of the room were watching now, some amused, some uncomfortable. But no one, not a single soul, intervened. "You need to leave," Rourke growled, his voice suddenly lower, sharper. "Now." "I'm not going anywhere," Camille said. "I have business here, and you, Lieutenant, are obstructing it." The word lieutenant hit him like a dare. He didn't like it. He didn't like her tone, her calm, her refusal to shrink. Then he snapped. He lunged forward and grabbed her arm, hard fingers like shackles digging into flesh. Camille instinctively twisted her body, freeing herself in one sharp motion. The response was trained, precise, not panicked, not impulsive, just controlled. That only enraged him more. "You're making a mistake," she warned, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. But Rourke didn't want warnings. He wanted dominance. And then came the fist, a heavy, hateful punch that landed square on Camille's cheek, sending her stumbling backward into the reception desk. Gasps scattered across the lobby, followed by a few nervous laughs as if violence against a black woman could still be considered funny in that space. She hit the floor. And still, she said nothing. No scream, no outcry, only silence. The kind that makes guilty men sweat. The kind that changes everything. The room held its breath. Camille lay on the floor, one hand braced against the cold tile, the other pressed gently to her cheek. A warm sting spread across her jaw, but still she didn't cry out. She didn't curse. She simply exhaled and began to rise. Dean Rourke took a half step back, stunned she'd gotten up so quickly. His fist still tingled with the violence of what he'd done. The few chuckles in the room faded into uneasy silence. Officer Luke Weller looked away, his face paling. A young female clerk dropped the papers she was holding, her mouth slightly open. And then it happened. A door opened behind the reception desk, the HR wing. Out stepped Gina Alvarez, clipboard in hand, mid-sentence. "Hey, I just need the final onboarding signature for..." She stopped, froze. Her eyes locked on Camille, then darted to Dean, then back to Camille. Her voice caught in her throat. The color drained from her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Chief Hart?" The word chief detonated like a bomb. All sound drained from the room. You could have heard a pin drop between the boots and the tension. Gina staggered forward, flipping through the folder in her hands like her fingers were on fire. She pulled out the personnel file and turned it around. There, staring back at them in black and white, was Camille Hart, Chief of Police, Ashland PD. Dean Rourke blinked. Once. Twice. "No," he muttered. "No, that's not..." Gina didn't look up. "That's her." Camille straightened, brushing the dust from her blazer. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. She looked Rourke in the eye, cold and unwavering. "Lieutenant Dean Rourke," she said, "you are hereby placed under arrest for assault." He laughed once, a short, hollow burst, like he still thought this might be some elaborate prank. But the room had already moved. Two officers, previously silent, stepped forward. One unclipped the cuffs from his belt. The other reached for Rourke's arm. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding," he cried, stepping back. "I didn't know if I had known. Camille cut him off with a single look. "You didn't need to know who I was," she said. "You showed me exactly who you are." And with that, the cuffs clicked shut. The reckoning had begun. The sound of the handcuffs echoed through the lobby like a closing verdict. No one spoke as Rourke was escorted out, his eyes wild, his breath sharp, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You're making a mistake. I've served this department for 15 years. I know the mayor personally. I deserve..." But no one was listening. The officers who once laughed at Camille now stared at the floor, suddenly unsure of where they stood or who they had been standing beside all this time. Camille didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply turned, adjusted her jacket, and said to no one in particular, "Resume your duties. Internal Affairs will be in contact." Then she walked toward the HR office, leaving behind a stunned silence and a new order. By nightfall, the video had surfaced. Shot from the back of the room by a civilian staff member, the footage captured every second. The disrespect, the punch, the arrest, the reveal. It hit social media like a lightning strike. Within hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times. Chief Hart began trending across platforms. Talk radio lit up. National outlets picked up the story by morning. Pundits called it a watershed moment in American policing, a department caught red-handed, not by outsiders, but by the very woman hired to lead it. At City Hall, Mayor Sandra Keene called an emergency press conference. This incident confirms what many in our community have long suspected, that racism doesn't always wear a hood sometimes, it wears a badge. But under Chief Hart's leadership, Ashland will not turn away from this moment. We will confront it. Camille stood at her side, composed but unwavering. Behind the scenes, Internal Affairs began issuing suspension notices. Every officer seen laughing in the video was now under review. Several quietly cleared their desks, others lawyered up. And yet, not everyone turned away. Captain Elijah Brooks, a quiet black veteran of the department, approached Camille that evening. "I've been here 20 years, he said. "I've kept my head down, but maybe it's time I stopped doing that." Camille looked him in the eye and for the first time that day allowed herself the faintest smile. "It's time," she said. By Monday morning, Camille was behind closed doors with Captain Elijah Brooks, surrounded by stacks of personnel files, complaint reports, and internal memos that hadn't seen daylight in years. What they were looking for wasn't just a pattern, it was a deliberate system. Camille flipped through an old complaint from 2017. A black officer, newly transferred from Atlanta, had reported racist remarks during a training session. The case had been investigated internally, no action taken. The officer resigned 6 months later. Another file, a use of force complaint against a black teenager. Body cam malfunctioned, no footage available. Case dismissed, and then another, and another. 14 cases in 6 years, Elijah muttered, reading over her shoulder. All suppressed, redirected, or reassigned. Camille circled a name in red pen, Lieutenant Dean Rourke. His signature appeared on half of them, but it wasn't just him. Other names kept recurring. Sergeant Trent Mathers, Captain Jerry Lang, Detective Cole Hansen. Officers who had moved silently behind desks, climbed ranks without question, and, most telling of all, never faced accountability. "What is this?" Elijah asked. Camille leaned back in her chair, her voice low. "It's not incompetence. It's a machine. A machine that operated behind closed doors, that buried complaints, that shielded its own, that punished those who spoke out often by making sure they never rose above the lowest ranks. They called themselves the Circle, an informal but powerful alliance of senior officers, all white, mostly male, who controlled hiring decisions, disciplinary outcomes, and internal narratives. The Brotherhood in all but name, no symbols, no written code, just whispers, nods, and silent exclusions. "They've been running in this place longer than any chief," Elijah said. "Not anymore," Camille replied. That afternoon, she issued a quiet directive to Internal Affairs: reopen every complaint associated with the identified officers. All files were to be pulled from storage, digitized, and independently reviewed. No press, no fanfare. Just the slow, methodical disassembling of an invisible empire. Some officers noticed the change immediately. Doors that used to swing open stayed shut. Longtime veterans suddenly took early retirement. Others walked the halls more carefully, eyes darting, wondering if their time was coming. Camille wasn't just cleaning house. She was rewriting the blueprint, and every ghost in uniform would soon have a name. The church hall was packed. Folding chairs lined the aisles. Elderly residents sat beside high school students, mothers beside pastors, shop owners beside former officers, all drawn by a single flyer posted online the night before. Community Forum. Speak, be heard, be seen, with Chief Camille Hart. No cameras, no politicians, just people. Camille stood at the front, sleeves rolled up, no uniform, only presence. The microphone didn't amplify her voice much, but it didn't have to. The room leaned in. "I'm not here to make a speech," she began. "I'm here to listen." The silence that followed wasn't skeptical, it was cautious, fragile, until Mr. Raymond Knox, the same man who had been ignored in the station lobby days ago, slowly stood. He held a worn baseball cap in both hands, eyes cast downward. "My nephew," he said quietly, "was stopped by Ashland PD last year. No reason, just walking home with headphones in. They slammed him on the hood of a car, broke his wrist. Murmurs rippled through the room. He filed a report. We waited. Heard nothing. Months passed. Then we stopped asking." Camille nodded, her expression unreadable but deeply focused. "What's your nephew's name?" "Isaiah Green." She wrote it down, in pen. One by one, others stood. A high school teacher spoke of her students being profiled. A Latina mother described how her teenage son was followed by a patrol car for 6 blocks after soccer practice. A retired black officer, voice shaking, admitted he'd stayed silent too long. Camille didn't interrupt. She didn't defend. She only listened, page after page filling with names, places, years. Something began shifting, not just in the room in the city, The truth had always been there, but never this loud, never this unified. By the time the forum ended, over 50 people had spoken. Another 100 had left written testimonies. Camille stood, her notebook now thick with real voices. "Thank you," she said softly. "This isn't the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of the reckoning." As she exited the building, a teenager held the door for her and said, "Don't stop. We need someone like you in there." She met his eyes. "That's exactly why I'm not leaving." The call came just after midnight. A white officer had shot a 17-year-old black teenager on the east side of Ashland, unarmed, walking home from his part-time job at a convenience store. His name was Terrence Moore. By dawn, the street was blocked off with yellow tape. Protesters gathered before the sun rose. Grief hadn't even settled before rage took its place. Camille stood at the scene, jaw clenched, eyes scanning the sidewalk where the boy's blood still stained the concrete. His phone lay shattered nearby. A single unopened soda bottle had rolled under a parked car. The officer's body cam had malfunctioned. Again. By noon, the governor's office was on the phone. The city manager called twice. One council member even suggested Camille hold a press briefing and assure the public that a full review would be conducted. Code for stall it, soften the outrage, protect the department. Camille hung up. In a press conference that afternoon, she stepped behind the podium without a script. "Terrence Moore was unarmed," she said, "and the officer who shot him has been suspended without pay pending criminal investigation. There will be no administrative delay, no quiet committee. There will be full transparency and accountability." A gasp rippled through the room. Reporters shouted questions. "Aren't you concerned about officer morale? Do you have enough support from City Hall to stand by this decision?" Camille answered only one. "I didn't take this job to protect feelings," she said. "I took it to protect people." Back at HQ, the backlash was immediate. A few officers walked off shift in protest. Anonymous emails flooded internal channels calling her a traitor. "You just threw one of us under the bus," one message read. Camille didn't flinch. She'd expected this storm. That night, she sat alone in her office, the photo of her father, a former civil rights lawyer, staring back from the bookshelf. She whispered aloud, almost to herself, "This is the fire they said would burn me." Then she straightened her back and whispered again, "Let it." The courtroom was packed, not with the public, but with officers, former allies of Dean Rourke, IA investigators, city attorneys, reporters with notebooks open like weapons. The energy in the room was electric. History was being made one testimony at a time. Camille Hart sat tall in the witness box. "State your name and title for the record." "Camille Elise Hart, Chief of Police, Ashland Police Department." Her voice was clear, composed, but beneath the surface. Every word was laced with the weight of 2 decades in uniform. Every glance from the defense table was a reminder of the war she was fighting, not just outside the department, but within. Rourke's lawyer rose, all smug confidence and southern charm. "Chief Hart," he said, pacing slowly, "is it true that prior to your formal assumption of duties, you entered the police headquarters in civilian clothes, under false pretenses?" Camille didn't blink. "I walked in as a citizen. That's not false. That's reality for most of the people we claim to serve." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. "Would you say your presence was provocative?" "No," Camille replied, "but what I witnessed was..." She recounted the day in meticulous detail, the dismissive glances, the slurs whispered without shame, the punch that left a bruise on her face and a scar on the department's reputation. Her words didn't tremble. They landed like gavel strikes. Then came the turning point. Captain Elijah Brooks took the stand. For years, he had stayed silent, surviving, not living. But today, he looked directly at Rourke and said, "I saw it happen, and I stayed quiet. That was my failure. But I won't stay quiet now." One by one, others followed. Officers who had endured years of veiled threats and lost promotions. Administrative assistants who had buried complaints they were ordered to ignore. Even a former sergeant brought in from retirement who admitted the existence of the circle. By the end of the day, Rourke no longer looked defiant. He looked small, a man unraveling in a system he thought would always protect him. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty. Camille didn't celebrate. She simply rose, adjusted her badge, and walked out of the courtroom into the sunlight. The system wasn't healed, but it had, at last, been held accountable. 3 months later, the walls of Ashland PD didn't look the same. The portraits in the main hallway had changed, no longer just a line of white male chiefs in gold frames, but now interrupted by a striking photo of Camille Hart, captured the day after Rourke's conviction. Standing tall, fists at her sides, not smiling, just resolute. Inside the department, the air had shifted. Officers now underwent mandatory bias training, not a checkbox course, but real conversations, led by community leaders and trauma counselors. A civilian oversight board had been established, comprised of teachers, pastors, business owners, even 2 high school students. Complaints no longer vanished into drawers. They were tracked, investigated, and reviewed in public reports. Camille walked the halls often not as a figurehead, but as a presence. She shook hands. She remembered names. And when someone crossed the line, she didn't wait for politics to catch up. She acted. That morning, she stood at the front of the academy's graduating class, 20 new recruits in crisp blue uniforms, all standing a little straighter under her gaze. "If you came here to chase power," she said, "you're in the wrong building." A pause. The room held still. "But if you came here to protect people, to serve without prejudice, to uphold justice no matter who's watching, then you belong. And you'll be held to that every day you wear this badge." She handed the first badge to a young woman, Latina, barely 21, tears in her eyes. The room erupted in quiet applause. Outside, the streets of Ashland were still far from perfect. There were still protests, still angry letters, still reminders that healing was not the same as forgetting. But change. Real change was no longer a dream. It was walking the halls. It was standing at roll call. It was writing new rules into the walls where silence once lived. Camille stepped outside into the late morning sun, her phone buzzing with texts she didn't check. She didn't need the headlines. She had already written the story. And the next chapter would not be about survival, it would be about standard. In a world where injustice often hides behind uniforms, titles, and tradition, beneath the badge reminds us of something timeless. True leadership begins with integrity, not authority. Camille Hart didn't demand respect with loud words or force. She earned it by standing still, observing, and speaking only when it mattered most. For older generations who've seen systems fail time and time again, this story offers hope that change doesn't always come from revolution, but from the quiet strength of doing the right thing when no one else will. It teaches us that silence in the face of wrongdoing isn't neutrality, it's complicity. And that dignity, when rooted in purpose, can dismantle even the oldest walls. Whether in a family, a workplace, or a community, the lesson remains. It's never too late to demand better, to expect more, and to lead by example. Because sometimes the most powerful way to change the world is to walk into a broken place and choose to stand tall. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.